All right, well, good evening, everybody, fellow commissioners, city staff. I'd like to call tonight's meeting, this October 28th, the Planning Policy as well as the Development Commission to order. It is currently 6:30. Due to the virtual format of today's meeting, I'd like to start by providing some guidelines. We have participants attending by computer and others who will be attending by phone. For all meeting attendees, please speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking. Mute your microphone when you're not speaking. And if you're having any technical issues, try joining the meeting using a different device, such as a smartphone or tablet. Use the call-in information in the meeting invite to call into the meeting if necessary. Kristen, would you please call the roll for the planning policy?
I certainly will. Commissioner Bader?
Here.
Commissioner Zaragoza?
Here.
Commissioner Monahan?
Here.
Commissioner Lewis?
Here.
Commissioner Milligan? Not seeing Commissioner Milligan. Commissioner Voice?
Here.
And Commissioner File has an excused absence tonight.
Great, thank you, Kristen. And Lucy, would you please call the roll for the Development Commission?
You're muted, Lucy.
I thank you. I assumed you were having problems, not me. So that shows you I'm not up for this. Mike Brennan,
Here.
Richard Sanford,
Here.
Richard Soa,
Here.
Patty Dillon,
Here.
Brooke Shore,
Here.
Kevin Price,
Here.
Arthur Schulte,
Here.
Johnny Cada,
Here.
Mel Morgan.
Here.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Lucy, and thank you, Development Commission.
I'd like to note, sorry, excuse me, that at 6:33, Commissioner Milligan is present.
Great, thank you, Kristen. And hello, Nina. So as we move forward, we're going to be taking public comment. And as all of you guys know, public comments are an important part of the public process. We take them seriously and factor them into the decisions that we make. For the members of the public who are joining us right now, if there is anyone who would like to speak in general, please raise your hand virtually. And I believe Kristen will allow you to do this. I don't know who's actually clocking. Maybe it's Kristen, but somebody. And if you're on the phone, when she gets to you, you can press 3.
Right, if you'd like to speak, press *3. Or if you're on the phone, or raise your hand. I'll give it another minute. No, there's no one who'd like to speak at this time.
All right, moving along. So the next thing on our public agenda is for regular business. And at tonight's meeting, we will be discussing the zoning, land use, and form and intensity. The information that you guys have received, and I believe Minnie will go over this very quickly in her presentation, but questions 3 and 4 will basically be reserved for a later date. She can explain why. But in the interest of tonight, I also want to be very respectful of everybody's time. So my goal as chair will be to make sure that we adjourn on time. As we're moving along, I'd like to reserve about 10 minutes for public comment for each question 1 and 2. But I believe that good management is good time management. And just as everybody here is expected to come here at 6:30, all of you guys should have a clear expectation of when this meeting adjourns. So as the chair, if the meeting or the questions provide a lively discussion, we might have a 10-minute extension where we can do a round robin. Ultimately, I think the discussion for each question will be roughly around 40 to 45 minutes. Kristen.
Yes, I apologize. Somehow I still don't see it, but I got a text, I got a message that we do have someone who would like to speak, Connie Marsh. Is that okay if we do that now before we start the topic?
Sure.
Okay, we'll do that now. Connie, you are now a panelist.
Okay, I'm Connie Marsh. I live on Squawk, so I need to tell you just a smidge. We can't see the participants, and for some reason, you don't seem to be able to see my chats, nor could anybody see my hand raised. And some people are having a hard time getting on at all. So I don't know how that's all going to work out. Hopefully we can fix it. So you've gotten a couple of emails from me because I find this particular topic puzzling because it does not match what my expectations were for making the code easier to use, which seems to be the problem statement. If that is the problem statement, I would have expected some conversation about how the different ways that what you are planning are going to solve the problems. Instead, it seems to go into a zoning and use conversation that is leading to a larger conversation about upzoning for more mixed use in areas, which is actually a zoning conversation that is covered by the comprehensive plan, not something that you would address inside of the code. And so I am perplexed as to how this presentation is leading us to solving the problem of a code that is easier for the community and the developers and the city people to use. And I also don't understand how somebody could decide the mechanism of what to do with the intricacies of a table without understanding the implications of, say, combining two columns in a table of a super complicated form. So maybe you all could ask some of these questions to try to clarify what the actual intent is. And I will say, I think it's scope creep to start having a zoning conversation and what do we think about all of our zones when the zones are outside of Title 18. And we may need to have that conversation, but this is not the place to have that conversation. We have way more things to talk about. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And Kristen, do we have any additional people that'd like to speak?
Well, this is Kristen. Not that I can tell. I'm double checking the chat. And no, and I don't see anything on the
I
screen.
would say it was difficult for me to join, more difficult than usual. I had to try a few times.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I've gotten quite a few emails and notices while we've been going on, so I'm not sure what's going on, but right now I don't see any other comments.
Okay, and just for anyone who is out there, we will have 2 more public comments, one after each discussion question. As I was saying before, I'd like to keep us on time. But also, as far as the commission does reserve the right to continue to flesh this out at a later date if it so chooses, or we can also utilize staff by continually sending emails as far as comments and questions. So there is always that. As far as when you guys have a question or comment, please put it in the chat box so all can see, and please try and refrain from any meaningful dialogue in the chat. We're really just looking for question, comment, or clarification. Having said all that, I'd like to begin with Minnie's presentation. So Minnie, please take it away.
Good evening, everyone. It's great to see two boards together where you all bring your own expertise, one from reviewing the development projects and Planning Policy Commission really debating the policy. So we're looking forward to, jointly having a nice discussion. I just wanted to take a couple minutes just to set the framework for the discussion tonight. And one, I want to address the question 3 and 4 that are included in your packet. But we're working on a more robust process for that item to give it more attention that it deserves, then packaging it with the Title 18 update. So it is a gap that's identified in the zoning and uses category, but we are going to have a more well laid out process for that topic, and it'll come back to Planning and Policy Commission at a later date. But it is in your packet. So that's one item. The second, I think there is some confusion about the scope of combining the different zones and what that means. So I want to address it so for the benefit of everyone, including the community members that have made the comment, that it's absolutely not within the scope of Title 18 update to rechange the policies that are adopted in the comprehensive planning policies. So we've kind of done all those trainings with you in terms of the framework that we have to operate under. Title 18 update is an implementation of those policies. So by no means can we change the zoning that is inconsistent with the comprehensive plan or make changes to adopted policies that require preserving neighborhood character. We cannot change through a zoning that is inconsistent with those policies. So nowhere in this discussion that scope of having duplexes in single family zones, if that's not the adopted policy, if that's a discussion outside of the Title 18 update, that can be added to the work plan in the future by City Council. But at this point, the focus really is you have multiple codes, Central Issaquah Plan and Old Town, and the uses. And as the memo talks about, there are 250 uses that are listed. So there's that consolidation and streamlining of those uses. But the question 1 and 2 really are getting at how do you think, from your lived experience, are there uses, for instance, I think what we've heard from some conversations about, are there entertainment uses that are, is code a problem for having some of those uses? Grocery stores, other things like that, that from your lived experience in the community that you think are missing, are a problem to locate in Issaquah? Are there other uses that are more car oriented, but where should those go in terms of the pedestrian oriented spaces and things of that nature? So a focus on those and your experience from knowing your community would be helpful as we do this exercise of consolidating and streamlining them. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chair to kind of proceed with the discussion tonight.
Okay, well, thank you, Minnie. Is that the only presentation we have as far as, okay. So thank you. So basically, ladies and gentlemen, we have about 55 minutes per discussion question, and then with an additional 10 for public comment. So please feel free to enter your name in the chat if you wish to speak.
Kristen has a few slides to show.
I thought so.
Yep.
I do. I apologize. I'm getting email after email after email saying that people can't get in and they want to comment. So I'm trying to respond to them and see what I can do to help, and then not having any luck. So I apologize. Let me pull out the presentation really quickly. And I promise this won't take long. And as soon as I am done, I will try and get to all of those people who are emailing again right after this. 1 minute. Let me share my screen. All right. Can you all see it okay? Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So yes, we are talking zoning, land uses, and form and intensity. And as many mentioned, we're keeping this at a high level. These two topics can and do touch everything in the code. So tonight we're trying to stay at a higher level and get broader direction from you all. So zoning. I don't think this was in the packet. Out of our existing land use code, the purpose says, plural, of zoning are to, 1, achieve a balanced community, promote a quality of life and a people place, and require environmental excellence. Okay, so what does zoning do? Zoning touches and it regulates uses inside each zone. So you'll see on the screen, we have, cultural and business district and single family small lot zoning and community facilities, recreation, and mixed use. We have all these different zones. Each one of these zones has different uses that are allowed to go in there. And with those uses, or in those zones, are also, what are the setbacks? How high can the buildings go? What does the impervious have to be? Or in, say, Central Issaquah, what is the floor area ratio? What is the maximum? What is the base? So it regulates all those things, or so many things involved in development. So with it, and we did talk about this in our packet a little bit, are intent statements. Each zone has an intent statement attached to it. And this is also pulled out of our current Title 18 IMC, whoops, not 180, 1806020. What's the point? Why do we have these? So it's to determine the appropriate locations of uses. Which zones do they go in? Determine appropriate conditions of development, and provide the basis for the reviewing official to interpret the standards. So I've said it before, and it came from Lucy, I'll give her credit, but the intent or the vision for the zone stays the same, but how you achieve those things can change. So with the intent statements for each zone, you're setting that vision for the zone, and the regulations are how you get there. So I'm sure you all are familiar with this, but I'm going to go over it again. This is a snippet from our permitted uses table. Excuse me. On the left-hand side, right here, are the list of uses. Now we have 250 uses right now that are listed in here, and it doesn't even include some uses that are out there. New things pop up all the time. So one of the things we would like to do is try and find a way to have a smaller list of uses, but still be able to know clearly what goes in each zone. And if we don't know clearly, then what's the criteria to determine that? That's something that we'd like to do. Up here, you have the zones. This is another problem because we are about to throw in all of the zones from Calais and all of the zones from Central Issaquah and all of the zones from Issaquah Highlands. So that's a lot of zones. So something that we have talked about is grouping these, and that's part of what came up in the memo and was a little confusing, but what some cities do, many cities do, is they will take all of the residential zones and then we'll just have a permitted uses table for those. It would look something like this. It would just have residential uses zones with all the uses that are allowed in there on the left-hand side. And then we would do commercial and then maybe facilities. So that's something that we've been talking about doing. It would help staff. And then in here, right now, we're not going to talk about what the numbers mean. It's level of review, but we're going to get into that later. But if there's a number in that box, that means that that use is allowed in that zone. So a billiards and pool hall is allowed in these zones: professional office, cultural and business, mixed use, retail, intensive commercial, and community facilities. That's how that works. And right now in our code, it's a crazy mess. And we need to find out a way to streamline and clean it up. So I'm already to questions. Are you all ready, or do you have any questions for me and any clarifications that you need made first before we move on? I talk about enough information because I was really fast, but there's also a lot in your packet. So
Kristen,
yes,
we have a question from Commissioner Milligan.
yes.
Thank you, Chair Voice. This is Commissioner Nina Mill again. Kristen, the question I had was, were you also talking about reducing the number of the different types of zones and combining several zones into one zone? And then if that was the case, I didn't see a recommendation. Or is it just reorganizing the document into different categoried charts?
So right now it's the category charts. And I'm not going to say it hasn't been talked about, but it's just a matter of us going through it and saying, I don't know, what are we going to do? Maybe we need to look at that. Maybe there's some zones that have the exact same uses, and what's the difference between them all? Or one zone only has this many. I don't know. It's something to talk about, but that's not on the table right now. It's not part of Title 18. I don't think. No.
Well, and just to build on what Kristen said, Lucy Sloman, I think that we haven't done that level of evaluation yet. And so that's part of the value that we see in combining all the residential zones into one table and all the commercial zones into another table, because it'll make it much easier to see where there are highly similar zones and to consider what are those differences? Are they meaningful? What would the potential impacts be? And then to have that conversation. Where there's more differences, or for some reason that, maybe there's very few properties that have a zone, which is the case with professional office, for instance. I think there's 3 properties, they're all developed. What we want to do is see, is it similar enough to another zone where there might be an opportunity to combine? But that's the kind of evaluation that we would do following this conversation.
The other thing, this is Minnie Dhaliwal, I want to make sure, we can't change the comprehensive plan without changing the comprehensive plan. So if there's in your packet, there's a table that shows the grouping of zones by comprehensive plan designations. So no work, even if we do this exercise, we're not going to be able to change the zoning or collapse them if they belong to different, for instance, mineral and conservancy, are 2 different comprehensive plan designations. So we're not going to be able to combine those, for instance.
And that wasn't our intent either, but we wouldn't be able to.
Great, thank you. And I think what I'll do is I'll wait till after questions until we start discussion to kind of figure out the timeline. That way everybody can be clear, and then we can have a wonderful and lively debate and discussion. Right now, Commissioner Brennan has a question. Please.
Thank you. So I'm just a question about, so in the presentation, it was about code structure, usability, understandable, et cetera. The question 1 is more about substance. And so I'm not clear yet about the breadth of what it is we're doing with regard to this particular effort. So when we're talking about locations where allowed uses are form and intensity standards that control the size and bulk, that's a substantive question about does the development fit within what you think the community should be. But the setup that that Kristen did was about the structure of the code and trying to make it more understandable, maybe more efficient to use. So I'm still not clear about how far into substance we're going to get about the content of the code, and is it accomplishing the outcomes versus usability, understandability. Is it understandable? Is it efficient to operate with? Did that make sense?
This is Kristen Leeson. It does make sense, and maybe it came off that way, but the beginning of it had to do with intensive zoning, and which goes to the uses in each zone, and looking at the permitted uses or things that you've seen out there are the uses that you see in, say, single family or mixed use residential or different zones, are they what you expect to see? And I'm going to go ahead and touch on question number 2, which is, are there things that you see that you don't want to see? Is one. Are there things that you'd like to see which would make an area more livable than it is? Say you want, 10,000 square foot commercial, retail stores or little grocery stores in your neighborhood that aren't allowed, and maybe you want to allow those. So that goes toward the intent of the zone and so it's a mix of the two. Are there uses that you'd like to see in these zones, with the visions for these zones that you're not seeing now, or that you'd like to see go away?
Okay, great. That helps. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Brennan. We have a process question from Commissioner Milligan.
Hi, Commissioner Milligan here. Are we trying to cover both those questions, or are we just trying to talk about zoning and then uses, or what is the order of the night? Because I think I heard Chair Voice say that there'd be multiple opportunities for the public to speak. So are we trying to divide the topics into sections?
So I guess I will take that question. Thank you, Commissioner Milligan. So what I'd like to do is flesh out all the questions right now that anybody has as far as the presentation, and then basically, we can start with question 1 and question 2. After the end of question 1 debate, we as a group can figure out if we need a little bit more time, we can do a round robin, but I'd like to give 10 minutes for public comment after question 1, 10 minutes for public comment after question 2. So it might take us from 9 to 9:20, but like I said, I'd like to set the expectation that you guys know, I don't want this to be a meeting in perpetuity. Again, we all have the opportunity to vote if we want to meet and continue this conversation at a later date, or continue to utilize our staff by emailing them. So that was my intention. So again, just looking for more questions as far as the presentation, and then we'll move on and dissect question 1 and 2. And I guess I'll give it a few more seconds, and then we'll probably move into question 1 debate and discussion. I'm not seeing anything. So let's open it up to the first question asked of us tonight. I don't know if we want to bring it back on the presentation screen, but if we could, that would be good, at least to start the discussion. Please. And if anybody wants to jump the gun and just put in commentary or anything, there we go. Commissioner Monahan, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, good evening. I'm Matt Monahan here. I guess I'll take aim at one particular use that I'm not a fan of. So I live in the Issaquah Highlands, and I love walking around it. But the one area that's kind of dead is the area in front of the storage facility, kind of towards the north end. And so I know that there was a request to put another storage facility on another parcel in the Highlands, and I just don't think that would really drive the kind of neighborhood that we want here. The Westridge North houses are selling like hotcakes right now. Those townhomes are going to go too. So we're getting a lot of families here. And I don't think we'll be well served by having 2 storage facilities within half a mile of each other. So I'd like to see that use, if not cut out, made very, very high bar to put in one into a walkable mixed use neighborhood.
Thank you, Commissioner. We have a comment from Commissioner Milligan.
Commissioner Milligan here, thanks. I'm waiting for other people to sign up, but I didn't want to eat away your precious time. Thank you, Commissioner Monahan. That's on my list tonight too. And though we may be too late to change the zoning that's going to impact the Issaquah Highlands, self-storage has been a sore spot for quite a while, and there was a very heated debate. The folks in the room here, I wasn't in the debate, I was just watching it, but the folks in this room, a lot of them will remember it, and I remember it being unsatisfying in an effort to reduce the number of zones where self-storage was allowed. And I would like to revisit that in reducing the number of zones where self-storage is allowed, because I know that it was a frustration, something about the process. As I said, I don't know the details as well as those other people in the room. But one of the issues that I had with this topic is not only that it doesn't create the vibrant streetscape that we are all hoping for, and nor does it add to the beauty of our city, but it appeared that home builders, whether they were apartments or townhomes or whatever, were teaming up with these self-storage and saying, hey, you don't have to build as big a home because I'm going to plunk down a self-storage within a couple blocks from there, and then everybody can store their stuff over here in this vacuous block of storage. So I do hope that we have a lively discussion about that, and I'll just throw it out there. I wish we could just reduce the zone that was an allowed use to intensive commercial. Dare you to put it only in intensive commercial. Thank you, Chair Fall. Chair Fall, no, Chair Voice. Boy, old habits.
Thank you, Commissioner Milligan. Everybody's a little slow at their keyboards tonight, especially from these groups. Basically, I have it down as 7:45 to begin public comment on question 1. So we've got some time to fill. And again, I won't force anybody's arm, but Commissioner Milligan, please.
We've got so many smart people in the room tonight. This is Commissioner Milligan, and I really hope these people from DC speak up, like Mike Brennan. Thank you for signing up, Mel Morgan, all these veterans of this issue. Please speak up for us tonight. I also wanted to talk about something like either the vending stand or the smaller classification of grocery store. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that there's been a great deal of concern about the car-dependent neighborhoods that we have. And I'm going to just use a couple examples like Squawk Mountain and South Cove. And these folks, to get anything done, have to get a cup of coffee, to get a quart of milk, have to get in the car and go somewhere. And as I was looking at the allowed uses and where they are, how close could we get to going into a denser residential neighborhood and allow more of those commercial uses, the very small scale daily need. God, I have to have a coffee and a cookie kind of store, or I need some flowers for my mom. I've seen a great use of this in some of the older cities like Victoria. I just love it. So I'm wondering if there's a way that we can do that without imposing upon our single family neighborhoods with any large scale commercial. The purpose would be to reduce vehicle miles traveled. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Milligan. And now we go to Commissioner Brennan with a comment.
So Commissioner Milligan was thinking along the same lines I was thinking. It is those neighborhood serving businesses, so smaller scale, convenience. And then I would add on one thing, like the third place. It's a place where people go to gather, community gathering locations, whether it's a library, a local pub, a small restaurant with a patio, places where people can go and gather, have community space that could be public or private, near the neighborhoods or in the neighborhoods. And I know that gets a little bit tricky in development in already developed neighborhoods, but there's clearly a benefit not only to reducing car trips, but even creating community in a place where people can connect. So I think there's some benefits to that as well.
Great, thank you, Commissioner Brennan. And obviously, if people have questions as far as question 1, please feel free. And now we go to Commissioner Sanford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Richard Sanford. I have a comment about a permit that came before the Development Commission, and I think some of our other commissioners will probably remember this one. We were tasked with looking at a permit that was in intensive commercial zoning district. And also within that district were critical areas, King County critical areas. It had a stream of salmonid. It was in a flood hazard area and a critical aquifer recharge area. And this was an intensive commercial zone use, permitted use within that zone, as I said. But it was very challenging for us to try to balance environmental protection with the requests that were in that permit request, and to be able to come up with satisfactory conditions that would protect the environment as well as allow the permitted use. So I guess it raised the question to me, should we be permitting intensive commercial use that underlays essentially critical area overlay districting? And raise the question to me, are those overlays sufficient to protect critical areas? Basically, if one of the purposes of the code is to require environmental excellence, and a description in our code in IMS 1806 of intensive commercial is provide areas for intensive commercial services which may have negative impacts. It's hard for me to see whether we should allow those two to try to coexist. They seem antithetical. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Moving along, we have a comment from Commissioner Morgan.
Thank you, Chair Boyce. Mel Morgan from the Development Commission. And I would just like to second the comments from Commissioner Monahan and Commissioner Milligan about limitations on self-storage. I agree with their comments about the limitations they place on the pedestrian activity within city commercial zones. And so I would agree. I think Commissioner Milligan was recommending only allowing those intensive commercial areas, and I would agree with that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Lewis has a comment.
Thank you, Chair Voice. Commissioner Joy Lewis here. I think that Commissioner Stanford said it far better than I, so I want to piggyback on to his comments about heavy industrial commercial uses. I echo those sentiments and concerns. And I think that Commissioner Milligan brings up an excellent point when we talk about how unacceptable it is. And in Issaquah, we have food deserts. And we see the way that we were directed in Old Town to be unable to really protect that community. And by losing the Front Street Market, we became very vulnerable. And that by looking at how we're allowing our uses differently, we can start to address some actual needs of the community that have been kind of fallen to the wayside. So I think it's important for us to, again, start looking at how we're allowing a constricted use, right, to allow a way, whether we've talked before in this commission, whether it be about large national chains, whether it be about the size and scope that we're dealing with as far as square footage, but allowing a way for communities to be able to address the needs that they have specifically around food. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Commissioner Lewis. And as somebody who lives on Front Street, I can tell you I miss Front Apple Street so much. It was just a short walk for me. All right, we have a comment from Commissioner Schulte. Am I saying that right?
Yes, thank you, Chair Voice.
Thank you.
Great to see everybody, and great presentation. Glad we're getting involved in this conversation. I just wanted to support voice my support for an encouragement to continue exploring and growing the zones where we do offer multifamily and mixed use developments. And one of the big reasons is just the affordability factor. As we might have noticed, as we notice already, housing is expensive, and multifamily and mixed use is one of the best ways to offer a somewhat affordable housing. And there's different levels of affordability that can come with that. So Issaquah, and actually in Sammamish too, the surrounding area, I just saw in the news, I think Sammamish was rated #1 small town, small city in the nation to live. And obviously that impacts us, right? Because we're the neighbors. So we to promote that and to encourage, community development. I think multifamily and mixed use is important to be mindful of and continue, pursuing the zones where we can see a little bit more of that growth. So thank you.
Great comment. Thank you.
May I make a quick response?
Absolutely.
I just wanted to say tune in next week on November 4th because we're going to be talking about affordable housing. So truly, yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
Commissioner Morgan, please.
Thank you, Chair. One of the question I have is the necessity to still have a suburban estates, single family designation within the city. I think it's 1.24 units per acre, and given urban growth boundaries and how little land there is left, seems to me that we should have more intensive zoning throughout the city than that. So, thank you.
My ticker stopped ticking. There we go. Just have to wait a minute. Commissioner Brennan, please.
Have to cave under pressure, I guess. Thank you, Chair Voss. We did a walking tour of some of the projects with staff and looking at projects that have been constructed and looking at multiple locations. We did visit some that were in the central Issaquah plan area. And one of the things that's really striking as that plan continues to get to evolve with construction is what's happening at the street level, at grade. One of the projects, the Atlas project that fronts onto 7th Street or Avenue, it doesn't engage at all with the pedestrian environment. There's no front porches, there's no ground floor retail. It's essentially you're walking along, what is an impenetrable wall of the building, so to speak. I mean, there's nice landscaping, so I don't want to, bash it too hard. But we've got to make sure that what's going on in the intense areas, these mixed use or high intensity development areas, is that as it evolves, it's in an enjoyable place to be. There are things to see. There are people. There are places to go. There are breakout places where you can go relax, plazas, etc. So, and I know that's in the plan, but I think we need to make sure that what's happening is on the ground with the development is actually realizing that for the long term, because the projects that are being built now are going to be there for a very long time. And so we want to make sure that attention to what's happening at the pedestrian level is engaging, it's interesting, an attractive thing, attractive place for people to be. So that's one when we're talking about the form of development and what's in the land use code, particularly in these high density areas that we're paying close attention to for long-term success.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Brennan. And again, to kind of piggyback off them and not to pick on Atlas, but it's my understanding that their park is actually a public park. Is that correct? That recreational space that's kind of fenced off. My understanding is that is open to everyone. That is not their property.
So there's both public and private open space on the site. Near the Issaquah Creek, the bridge in Gilman is a public park, which is Senna Park. And I don't think any of that is fenced. There are 3 required, they're community spaces. That was how they met their project open space. And there are some sort of open fences that define public from private space. So when you say fence, that's what I think of.
Right, and I appreciate that, Lucy. I think that the problem is there's an illusion to people, the passerby, that thinks that is completely private property. I imagine you'd be hard pressed to actually find anyone outside of Atlas that probably utilizes that space. So,
This Senna Park.
right.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Lewis.
Thank you, Chair Boyce. Commissioner Joy Lewis here. To kind of actually, that's a good segue for me because while this has less to do with question one and kind of more addresses Steph's comments and question about how we want to be restructuring and reordering the uses, I think that a good example would be if you guys were hesitant to do a deep dive and do all of the uses under these categories. A good one would be the conservancy designation. Right now, we have a lot of layers when we look at the purposes and the intents of whether it's open space facilities, whether it's parks, whether it's designated to future be something, whether it is supposed to be complete green open space in perpetuity. And I think that this would be an interesting one to see. I give an example of how are we aligning our values to what we actually have in the code and being able to use that to say we both want to be able to clean this up and we want to be able to be protective. So for me, that would be kind of a direction to go from if you guys were looking to pick one particular type of use and then be able to break that down by category. I would recommend starting there and having us look at it and see, hey, does this represent our guiding documents? Does this actually reflect what we want in the community rather than having, we often have discussions of saying, well, what is allowed there? And we can start to see, oh, well, could it be something one day and where is that wiggle room, and being able to kind of really hone that in and narrow it in, I think would be a good place to be able to start. Thanks.
This is Kristen Leeson. May I ask a clarifying question? You said conservancy. Do you mean conservancy or community facilities?
Well, I think that when you talk about being able to have categories and break them all down, they're probably going to all roll into one. They're all of a like mind. And so I would be surprised that in a simplification of Title 18 that you're going to end up having both a conservancy and an open spaces. Right now we have open spaces that have several tiers, right? And then we have our conservancy, right? So I'm guessing that those are going to all be rolled up into one category that are going to have allowed uses. And so my suggestion would be to start there and have us look at it and say, hey, is this reflective of the community's desires? Is this reflective of all the policies and plans we've put in place, rather than starting with, for instance, ones where we have hundreds of uses, for instance, like in commercial zoning. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Milligan.
Hello, about question one. Commissioner Milligan here. I wanted to piggyback on Commissioner Brennan's comments and somebody else, maybe it was Commissioner Morgan, about, and to follow up, this is similar to the issue that we have with self-storage. And so we're talking about mass and use and these large buildings. When we reduce the setbacks and we have these buildings right up to the street front, if they don't have an active use on the ground floor, then we're not getting the result that we were hoping for. If we have, even if it's entirely a residential building, if it doesn't have access and activity on the ground floor at the street level, then we're not getting the engagement quality that we were hoping our community would enjoy. So I'm not quite sure what to do with that or where that goes, but I thought this seemed like the number one seemed like the place to talk about that. So, and Commissioner Brennan was bringing up the missed opportunity, and I think that some of that has been solved in the Central Issaquah plan about what happened at Atlas without or not getting access on the ground floor to units or retail. Oh, and I'm sorry, I want to bring up one more piece of inspiration. It's more of a question or a problem quiz for us all to lay awake at night thinking about. We have these wonderful ground floor spaces in Issaquah Highlands where I live in Star Point, but how do we encourage those spaces to be used in a dynamic, lively, community, valuable way? There's one that's sitting empty for God knows how long. Of course, we're in a pandemic, so I'm not going to call that out as a real problem. It might be related that way, but even Front Street talks about the uses that would make it the most vibrant part of town. Without being too prescriptive, how can we encourage the kinds of uses that give us the lively streetscape that we're looking for? So a question, not a comment, sorry. Back to you.
We're taking them all tonight. Questions, comments, clarifications, so don't feel bad. Yeah, no, I think I kind of look towards like Bellevue. I look like towards certain streets in NYC where they've done a real good job of not only creating the density that they have to have, but also that engagement. I think all of us who have walked any of those streets can realize there is a way to do it. And to your point, as far as more of a vibrant Front Street, I think I saw a plan not too long ago about like Alder Street where they wanted to turn, put lights on it and kind of make it, can't think of an example, but more of one of those lively streets you see. I think that's a great idea. And again, it kind of promotes not only the area itself, helps promote the business, and again, makes it a lively part of town that people want to be at. So, Commissioner Lewis.
Thank you, Chair Boyce. Commissioner Joy Lewis. I do have a question for staff. Generally, when we look at our packets, we are getting an overview of how staff has engaged with the public, right? Not just the public comments that are being submitted, but different town halls, different avenues for interested parties to be able to have spaces to connect, even whether that's questionnaires, right? There's a variety of things that we can do. I didn't see anything in this packet and was surprised, especially when we talk about question one being, where have you seen places in your community? I expected a little bit more from staff to tell me, what is the community telling me? Where is the community found that we're falling short? Where has staff found, hey, we're getting questions, we're getting requests for things that aren't allowed, and kind of having that overview. So I would love to hear a little bit more about how staff has reached out to the public prior to this meeting to have this very question answered by the people that it connects with.
Someone from the city like to pick that up?
I can start off with in my little time here, and it's 6 months now. Staff always gets calls where, this is a business. Can we go in here? Which is the use you're allowed in? We get business licenses. One of the things that I think people have talked to me about was places like towing companies. Everyone wants a very livable, walkable community, but there's still a need for those kind of spaces. And should Issaquah, designate spaces where those can go. People still are driving cars and they still need to have a call in a towing company, and where do they go? Or other businesses like a boat repair shop. I've talked to those people. Where in Issaquah can we locate? Which zones allow these kind of uses? Other types of uses that are, you get concerns from community members are where can this marijuana retail store go in, and what the separation between these uses needs to be. Is there going to be an impact for parking, for instance? I mean, how do we manage the parking for a very successful business and what that parking spaces need to be? So those are my interactions in my little time here of the problem things that I've heard. Yes, of course, the desire for, a grocery store, the places for entertainment, a trampoline place, that was brought up as a place where people go to, and do we have enough of those in our community? Surfing, places. So there's a desire for the live, work, play kind of vision for the community that are we missing some of those spaces? And there may be more than just the code that plays into it, the economics, the market factors, where people choose to locate those kind of places. So it may not be just a code issue. But to answer your question, Commissioner Lewis, what are we hearing? That's what I've heard in my little time here. But Lucy and Kristen, feel free to pitch in what you guys hear from community members that reach out.
Well, and I think I think Minnie, you summarized the kinds of comments that we are getting on a kind of individual basis. I would add sort of two other avenues one which I haven't really participated in as much are the affinity groups. And there are for Title 18, there are these groups. I sat in on the development group. There have been other ones that have taken place, but they have not been as targeted as you're describing, Commissioner Lewis. They're a broader brush with the intent of really providing an avenue to hear what, instead of responding to these more targeted kinds of questions, really, what are your concerns? What's working? What's not working? Now, that doesn't mean that some of it isn't feeding those answers, but it's less specific. I think the other part of this, which I'm going to take a little step to the side and just say that if you haven't already suspected this, there's likely to be a what we're calling a bike barn instead of a parking lot of topics that are going to come out of Title 18, but are too expansive to really be undertaken within Title 18. They have too much policy. There's a bigger community conversation that's needed. And one of those that we anticipate from the city's strategic plan are these neighborhood conversations about amenities and services and maybe facilities that neighborhoods either want to preserve or feel need to be added to support and create the unique neighborhoods that we know that we have in the city. So, you know, I think in some ways this is kind of the beginning of some of that work that we're seeing is going to come as we kind of work incrementally through neighborhoods, trying to understand what that is. And so I see this as a beginning rather than necessarily a conclusion as part of this process.
Thanks, Minnie, and thank you, Lucy. Fantastic answer. What I'm hoping is that when we actually are getting our draft code, that maybe it's even a symbol of that bike barn saying, hey, focus on this shiny object and let's start making a bucket. Let's start saying these are the need, this is what we want to be directing, because certainly there are many questions regarding policy, how we fine tune and get what we want to get that have come up in this discussion of Title 18. So being able to even have that visualization for us and being able to have that, we hear you, let's put that on the list. Let's get these buckets going and let's start to organize this now. It helps us to be able to say, okay, this has been heard. This is something we're going to be really fortunate to deal with in 2023. Let's focus right now when we're obviously next year going through and finishing up our draft code on Title 18. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Commissioner Lewis, and thank you, staff. According to my clock, we still have some discussion time. So please feel free. Commissioner Schulte.
Thank you, Chair Voice. Back to the earlier discussion by Commissioner Milligan and Commissioner Brennan, you know, both of which I support. I also want to voice my support for, you know, creating a more, you know, community-based interaction amongst the, you know, at the ground level of developments. For me, it seems like a lot of parts of Issaquah I've seen as be more kind of a pass-through instead of a destination. You know, in terms of the heavy traffic, for example, that we see going down towards Maple Valley or towards the south, and the congestion that's formed as a result of that. So I think if we can work on, you know, developing and building communities that, you know, do promote that ground level activity, I think that's critical. And with that, you know, comes the need to bring people, right, and to house people, and that's why we should be taking a look at bulk and scale. because it's very difficult to have one level of retail, one story of multiple retail, but not so much residential around it to support that. So anyways, I just wanted to provide my support for, ground level community and interaction. I think it's very important.
Commissioner Brennan.
Thanks, Jay Boyce. So Lucy's response made me think about when we're talking about the single family or the low density residential zones. And was it a couple of years ago, I guess, somewhere like in that neighborhood, we went through an update of the Old Town residential design standards. So there was a concentrated effort to really preserve the character of that neighborhood because of its, location. And so when you're thinking about the future growth, we've been talking about primarily around the higher density uses, the commercial or mixed use zones, but also need to think about the residential neighborhoods or zones. Some of them older down in the valley on the floor of Issaquah, and then the newer residential neighborhoods up in Highlands and Tallis and other developing areas. So it's being really thoughtful about where does the density go when you're talking about housing, and that gets really controversial, I think. But it is thinking about, when you're thinking about the character of the neighborhoods, Lucy, that you were describing. It's looking at the location of the low density or lower density residential uses and thinking about, and I know this could be comp plan stuff too, so I don't want to cross the line here, but thinking ahead about what is the character, the future character of those neighborhoods, including whether or not you're going to allow for additional density to occur with townhomes or other things, depending on the location. So I think that is a form and function issue that needs to be, maybe it's a bucketed item, but it's something that the city needs to think of, that we collectively, the city needs to think about. I think the work done in the Old Town neighborhood made a lot of sense. And we probably aren't going to undo that. I mean, that was a purposeful effort. But thinking about that sort of an effort in other parts of the city, and it's not just about preserving the character, sometimes it's about what's the future character we want to have. And that means changing it. So just another issue to think about on the form, particularly out in the residential neighborhoods.
Thank you, Commissioner Brennan. And now we have Commissioner Zaragoza.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Zaragoza. I wanted to comment on having residential above retail, but also talking about these big box supermarkets, Safeway and QFC. They're massive, they're huge, they take up, very large spaces inside where we want to really pack those communities in. Building up above those, I think would be great. And there's awesome examples of the Wajimaya and the ID in Seattle. Also, I think in Capitol Hill, there's another market very similar to that. They're bustling all around those markets. There's just always people. It's always kind of alive and fun places, even though you're standing in front of a supermarket. So I think that would be a great target as we get new stuff in, or we're replacing or retrofitting or upgrading. Thanks.
Great comment. Yeah, I'm thinking myself of that QFC or the PCC down there that have, all of that living space above it. And then we look kind of at some of our big box stores and there's nothing above it. And it is just impervious surface and big box. Commissioner Schulte.
Thank you, Chair Boyce. Great point, Commissioner Zaragoza. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Okay, great. Yeah, great point. As we look at the future, and especially as kind of what we're discovering, through the pandemic, I think what we'll start seeing is, a lot of retailers really looking at a way to reduce their footprint, both from a, sustainability perspective, but as well as, rentable and usable square footage. With e-commerce and with examples of what's happened to Sears in the past years as they've started downsizing, and those big box buildings have either been demolished or converted to other uses. So I think we'll see a lot more of that, and with that comes additional space, right? As these retailers look to downsize, reduce their footprint. And more opportunities for residential living as well. So great comment.
Thank you, Commissioner Schulte. And to piggyback off of him, you think about all the things that we're doing as far as Amazon home deliveries. I mean, Home Depot delivers, and you think about, again, we're talking about 20 to 30 years out, which is kind of the mission statement, at least for our commission. And you think of drone deliveries that will probably be quicker here than any of us would actually like to think. So all of these things will probably reduce the footprints of some of these bigger retailers. So I'm not seeing any more comments. I'll give it a minute, and then from there we're going to go to public comment. But I want to give the commissions at least an opportunity if anything pops up last minute. And again, everybody has the opportunity. At the end, we'll decide if we need to continue to flesh this out in another joint meeting or if emails will suffice. So I'll give it a minute. All right. So what I'd like to do now is open it up to public comment for this discussion question. I know there were some people that were having connectivity issues, so I'm sure we'll probably have some additional comments. The idea was to try to keep it around 10 minutes, but I know some people who couldn't get into the general at the very beginning, so this might go a little bit longer. So Kristen, do we have anyone signed up to speak?
No one has signed up, but let's see if anyone would like to speak. Either raise your hand or hit *3 or let me know in comment. Oh, we have one right here. Connie Marsh, I'm going to make you a panelist. Connie, you are a panelist. You can turn your screen on if you'd like.
Yep. Okay, some other people have finally been able to get on. It took them almost 45 minutes to get on. So, well, this is the same conversation we had with the Issaquah Highlands, almost 20 years ago. And then we had the same conversation again with the Central Issaquah Plan. And so not so much with Talus, because that turned into this sort of housing area as compared to a mixed use area. Issaquah Highlands was provided the opportunity to have much more open land and be much more dense. Instead, it chose to sprawl out over the land, which is interesting. Our Central Issaquah Plan allows many parts of our entire valley floor to be 12 stories tall. And we have all these rules in place in order to make it walkable and active with parks and getting people out of their cars. And you will notice in the Central Issaquah Plan, what we have achieved is housing development way out on Newport Way. We have not gotten much further than that. We have the zoning in place and the rules in place to achieve what you all want. And it's not here yet, right? The Issaquah Highlands had the capacity to do that. They chose not to do that. We have Old Town, which has the rules in place to be able to do what you want, and it is not achieving that. So rather than changing or spreading the uses around, hoping that if we actually add uses in more neighborhoods, that will occur. I think we need to ask ourselves why it's not occurring in the places where we already have the rules and regulations and want it to happen. Because those are the places where we are actually going to be able to get a bus. People are actually going to be able to walk around and use the existing retail. We can get some of those owners of these stores who say they aren't going to redevelop for 50 years because they're making mega bucks off their box store to want to redevelop. Those are the nuts and bolts of our issues. So I don't want to have the same conversation for the third time and end up with the same result, that we don't get the dense, vibrant areas that we like. Our problems are more in our inability to implement the rules and regulations that we have than it is to create more uses and places. So I agree with y'all's vision. I don't agree with what the solution might be. And one quick thing on combining columns in the use table. I use the use table all the time. And if anything, we don't have enough discrete columns for parks. We have had many issues for not being able to define what kind of a park should go in what place and what kind of stormwater should go in what place. Maybe there's a different way to do that. I'm not sure. With all the varying types of housing, I'm not sure that consolidating the columns and then creating overlays is a simplification. It sounds suspiciously like what we already have. We just don't call it an overlay. We just go to a separate set of codes. So what I would like to hear in this is how combining the tables and squishing them is going to solve the ease of using the code as I use it every day, as staff uses it every day, and as developers use it every day. And so that part is totally missing from this conversation. For me, it's an interesting conversation, but it isn't a Title 18 conversation to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Kristen, do we have any additional speakers?
Yes, we do. Susan Neville would like to speak. Susan, I'm making you a panelist. You are a panelist, you're unmuted, and you can turn on your camera if you'd like.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. I'm glad to be here. It took me a little while to get here. Thank you, everyone. It's really been stimulating conversation. I wanted to really speak to number one, which is what you're doing. I'm not sure where this fits, but I'm going to tell you my thoughts and then we can figure it. I was traveling north towards Gilman on a side street, right, heading towards Wells Fargo. And it was the evening, and I looked up, and there was this huge light, massive structure, and I thought a spaceship had landed. And I realized it was the new Costco building, and all the lights were on, and I had not seen it in the evening. So it kind of took my breath away, and I thought, wow, being part of the Title 18 process and following it all the way along, we have a huge amount of challenges. And I don't know where this fits, but what I thought to myself is we as a community, we have a vision. And when I looked at that structure and the lights in the building, it didn't quite fit that vision. And I was wondering how we're going to encourage our corporate partnerships that are important going forward, but yet still keep the height and the density in line of what we want. So I don't know if this is a place that you speak about it, but I just wanted to share that episode that happened. And I just had one other comment regarding transparency. And I think when you are saying going forward, we can handle some of our discussion in email, that kind of leaves some of that transparency out. And I think I don't want to be lost along the way. So I just wanted to share that too. Thank you.
Thank you. Kristen, any additional public comment?
Yes, and thank you. Sorry, I was reading the comments. I do want to let everyone know, but for some reason the hand raising is not working tonight. I cannot see it. So if I'm going to let's see. Here's what I'm going to do.
I can see it. I can see it, Kristen.
You can?
Yes.
Okay, I can't see it tonight, but I'm going to ask someone real quick. We have a call-in user with the first few numbers are 206-300. Oops, I can't unmute you. I don't know. Okay, I'll figure that out. But in the meantime, yes, Ann Fletcher would like to speak. So, Ann, I am making you a panelist, and you are unmuted. You may turn on your camera if you'd like. And you're unmuted. There you go.
Okay, thank you. I just, this is my first time doing it on the phone since the other way didn't work. So thank you. I am a little bit discombobulated here. So thanks for your patience. I just wanted to make some general comments because I'm feeling like I'm just starting to get into this, but my name is Ann Fletcher. I'm a longtime resident and I am with People for Climate Action. The zoning is something that the climate action people have been interested in as a way of reducing our carbon emissions with the mixed use. I believe it's one of the items in the draft climate action plan, but there aren't any specifics about how we would go about doing that. So the comment that I wanted to make is that I'm learning a lot tonight. I think there's a lot more discussion to be done. I think that we have, as one person mentioned, we have places where we have mixed use. We need to study and make those work better. I think we have to be careful about, our steps in studying, selecting, and prioritizing those areas for mixed use so that we are the most effective and efficient that we can be. I don't see at this point, getting rid of single family zoning completely. I think it needs to be much more thought out and step-by-step process. And I do believe that I heard one commissioner say that this really is hard not to get into the comp plan business because the comp plan needs to support whatever steps that we take. And I will like to see overall planning discussions, methodical, thorough way of going about doing this transition that I do believe we need to make for the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And Mary Lynch would like to speak next. So Mary, I am making you a panelist. Whoops, one second. There you go, Mary. You are a panelist and you're unmuted.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if my video is working. It doesn't matter. Some of the comments that came up about, a lot of questions going on from some of the potential companies moving into Issaquah and where they should go. I was part of the Central Area Task Force, and then I was very active when we went back and redid the Central Area Task Force. And all those times we talked about specifically the Central Area Plan and what areas, could be used for storage, and identified the areas over along East Lake Sammamish that already have the storage, those places could be there, and made sure as part of the Central Area Plan, we identified the different areas to house those things that were needed, or also the auto repair, and that we didn't want some of these places to go into the other parts of the Central Area Plan, just like I don't think we want it into the single family. And I think Connie kind of alluded to it, and so did Susan. My disappointment has been is I think we as a city have not gone out and talked to those people wanting to come and develop in Issaquah what our vision is. Because it was very disappointing where we saw all the build out with Anthology, with Ravel, with Riva, and now with the other one that is now before the city. All we're getting are housing units with no mixed use at all. And when we were at the development planning meeting, when we first heard about these developments going in, that was the first time, and it already was a done deal. And city staff said, sorry, they didn't have that in their plan, and we're going ahead with it as it is. And so I don't think as a city we're selling what our vision is. And I would hate to see that we expand it and change, the zoning and make it more complicated, or look at moving it into the single family areas as part of what we're doing now with Title 18. And so I think we need to concentrate on working with people and those that are coming and getting them to see our vision and making sure that we live up to our vision. That being said, that's it.
I don't see anyone who else wants to speak. I'm not seeing anyone else. And I think everyone who's out there has spoken, so.
Okay, well, thank you, Kristen. So now what I'd like to do, everyone, is to move on to question 2. And if we could have staff, maybe for the next 10 minutes or so, put that question up on the screen, maybe take it down after 10 minutes, but just to get the conversation going. Yeah, we'll start with question number 2. And we have a comment from Commissioner Milligan.
Oh, I'd love to start it off. Commissioner Milligan here. And because I cheated and talked about something during question 1, I wanted to follow up on it here, especially to clarify, since we heard such good comments from the public. And I think what I was saying, and Commissioner Brennan can clarify what he was saying, but I think, and even Commissioner Lewis had comments about this, about how do we have these residential areas that do not have their daily needs, such as in food or gathering spaces. And I had suggested, how do we solve that? Or I'd asked, how do we solve that? And wondered if it had to do with uses, very light uses that could be allowed in residential areas. Is that the solution? I don't know that that's the solution. Perhaps a better application could be looking at those large areas, single family residential, say, or even mixed use, I mean, not mixed use, but multifamily, where pockets that are served possibly by transit or are at the nexus of those communities that could be zoned to allow light community retail uses. I mean to suggest the behavior that I'd like to see, and not necessarily how we get there. So I mostly wanted to clarify that for the public, because I don't think that it would be appropriate to add those uses just anywhere in our single family neighborhoods, but the single family neighborhoods definitely need something to reduce their dependency on cars and transit, which isn't serving them, and to find a way to serve those communities' needs to get together and be a cohesive and whole neighborhood. That was my intention. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Milligan. And as I wait for a few more comments or questions into the chat, just so I'm completely clear, and I know I had the opportunity to talk to staff a little early today, is basically we're still kind of looking at this high level view. And I think some of the concern is the idea that, you know, this is all going onto a chalkboard somewhere and we're never going to see it again. I don't think that's what's going to happen. So I hope that would put some people's mind at ease. This is to give the city some direction as far as what we're thinking about. And again, this is just the first part of, I think, a 3-step process. So there is more to come. In fact, I was looking at the calendar and it looks like we have a couple of joint meetings with the Development Commission. So yeah, so we still have a ways to go. Commissioner Lewis, please.
Thank you, Chair Voice. Commissioner Joy Lewis here. I think that this question is a very interesting one that I think is very fun to think outside of the box. And something that I find that our community is missing is the chance for true community investment and being able to have the city control more of its land use. Right now, we have a policy of buying up spaces along our creek beds to be able to better manage for ecological reasons. And I would like to see this actually spill over more towards our large disparity of jobs numbers when looking at our housing numbers. And one way that that could be done is through incubators. There's been a lot of successful arts incubators in Georgetown. It's a good example of a not too far away neighbor where this has been successful, and being able to create spaces in our community for people to start businesses and to be able to have a buy-in, to be able to say you are able to lease space at an affordable price. When we talk about affordable housing, it's important also to look at commercial retail. We all, I think, expected there to be some type, the market to bear some type of that weight in pandemic, and we haven't seen that, right? Commercial banking has decided to prop up commercial real estate to a degree that has really boxed out small local businesses from being able to get the square footage they need just to start something off in the community. When we look at how the intent of what Issaquah Highlands was supposed to be 20 years ago, this is not what was envisioned. This was not the plan. Instead, we let the market decide what could go in. And so we ended up getting big box chains in the Highlands, and it was not conducive to the community. I'm excited to see small inroads that we've had recently to be able to create market spaces for small local businesses. And I think that needs to be increased. And I think a good way to do that is to think about how we promote entrepreneurship in our city and being able to have more spaces for artists to be able to see if their ideas can grow into a business. So that would be my comment on this. Thanks very much.
Great comment. Great comment, Commissioner Lewis. That was fantastic. Commissioner Dillon.
Thanks, Chair. That is a hard act to follow. Going back to Commissioner Milligan's comment and this discussion kind of mixed use and how we promote that and haven't been seeing it even in areas potentially where it's allowed. Are there avenues that we actually restrict uses in some particular areas and that purely residential is not an allowable use, but mixed use is, in order to discourage the type of development that we've seen out along Newport without those neighborhood commercial type uses to complement the residential?
May I comment? This is Kristen Leeson. Hi. So there are avenues to do that. We have a zone that was created in the 2016 moratorium called the vertical mixed use zone. And it requires that you have mixed use. So you have to have either an office or commercial use on the bottom floor and then residential uses on top. So there are avenues to do it. That was one that we used at that time. And there are other things to look at as well.
Thank you, Kristen, and thank you, Commissioner Dillon. I apologize for that frantic running. My Mac just gave me a message. It's about to die. All right, still waiting for additional comments, questions, clarifications. Commissioner Sanford, please.
Thank you, Chairman Voice. Our former beloved Front Street Market has been mentioned a couple of times, so I think this is a somewhat related point. When Front Street Market disappeared, I communicated with the City Council and Mayor to try to see if there were any kind of incentives that we could offer the owner to keep a neighborhood grocery there as kind of the anchor of that neighborhood. I think often for neighborhoods, when we think of them, it's one of the most central and important uses we can provide, the neighborhood market. And essentially, the answer was that there was no incentive that they could come up with to incentivize the owner to have another small food store in there. And maybe this is a Bike Barn issue, I don't know, but it kind of echoes some of the other points that have been raised. So the idea of incentivizing owners either through reduced fees or taxes, I think could be something that could be explored. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting how throughout human history, it's always kind of been centered around the market, right? In Costa Rica, they still have neighborhood markets called pulperias, where everybody goes and buys their eggs, their milk, their chiclets, all of these things. And they are still there, and they still have the big box stores that came and moved in 20 years ago, but they haven't been able to put the pulperia out of business. I see a hand, and I believe that's Commissioner Soa.
Correct. That's right. I'd be curious from staff perspective. It seems to me that we have a whole bunch of opportunities in the code to do just about whatever you want in a lot of different places. And I'd be curious if there are applications that people have asked for that were told they couldn't do it because the code wouldn't allow it, because the zoning wouldn't allow it. It seems like we've got this notion that there are community uses that the community desires, but I don't know that there have been any that haven't been able to be fulfilled. So I'd be curious on what the perspective of the staff was. That made sense.
One I would point out that may be one of those interim uses while we're waiting to empty our bike barn is food trucks. Our code, this speaks to something Kristen mentioned at the beginning. During the pandemic, excuse me, we got a lot of requests to put food trucks out there, and our code is confusing, and it's not really clear where they can go, especially in right-of-way. And that's probably a use that's more palatable because it doesn't exist all the time. And so that's one that I know that we want to clear up through this process. And I guess the other thing I would add is we do also get this is not so much that we're turning them down because it's not an allowed use. We get a lot of requests that we hear about from economic development for research, development, small businesses, small business manufacturing, processing of coffee, beer, wine, things like that. And those are tricky because we don't have a lot of intensive commercial land. And therefore, there's just not a lot of places where those businesses could go.
Thank you, Lucy. Yeah, I'm reminded of Commissioner Lewis's comment And it's really what type of city do you envision in 20 years? Are we going to have local brewers? Are we going to have places for arts? You know, more of the small retail, small business owners? Or are we going to have big box stores? And I won't mention any names because that wouldn't be fair, but I think you all know what I mean. Commissioner Schulte.
Thank you, Chair Boyce. It was great to hear from Minnie and Lucy earlier about, you know, some of the concrete examples in terms of kind of what the community members are looking for. I think I've come to the realization that, an acceptance really, that it will be very difficult to satisfy all the wants and needs, if not impossible, to really bring all the uses that we've discussed and the community is asking for, you know, to our city, just due to, you know, land, you know, availability of land, the geographical challenges, you know, the wetlands, and I think that's okay. I think one of the big things about being a strong community is also being a good neighbor, a neighbor to the cities near us, whether it's Sammamish, Bellevue, Snoqualmie, North Bend. You know, I think it's okay that if there's not a specific use within the city, yet is nearby, right, near Bellevue, right off I-90, I think that's okay to do a drive. And, you know, I guess what I'm saying is we shouldn't spend too much effort taking on a task where we're trying to fit everything into the city of Issaquah. I think it'll be a challenge, if not impossible. And it's okay because we do have great neighbors around us. And, you know, that's just something that kind of I've come to accept. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Schulte. That's definitely profound. I mean, I think all of us would agree quality over quantity. What that looks like, I don't know. That's why we're talking. So, Commissioner Milligan.
Hi, thanks. This is Commissioner Milligan, and thank you for the inspiration, Chair Voice and Lucy Sloman. I have two questions because it's hard to make a comment because I really don't know what the answer is. But I think what we're trying to do is point attention to trouble areas where we could improve. And this is micro, but I'm just using it as an example. I don't mean to be so micro about uses, but clothing fabrication is only allowed in intensive commercial. Why is that? You know, I mean, to Chair Voice's point, there are businesses of the future that aren't the sweatshops of the past that perhaps don't need to be cordoned off to a very small zone in our city. And I don't know what, you know, that's just one. Maybe it is. There was a beautiful clothing designer in Bellevue, downtown Bellevue. Wasn't a problem to have them there. So I wondered if that kind of legacy thing, and are there others like that? And then the other inspiration that I've had from these previous comments is we do make use of square footage limitations in some of our uses and zones. And it sounds to me like I'm hearing that we might like to do a little more of that. Would that encourage small businesses? Or would it just make our place a really expensive place to do business? I don't know. But I thought it would be worth amplifying that and finding a nexus in the words in our Title 18 about square footage limitations. Maybe that's something that could help us in this. Thank you.
Could I add to that? I think Commissioner Milligan's bringing up a point that may be kind of buried in our memo. Because you know, and Kristen touched on this in her presentation, that there's some things that are extremely specific in our land use code. But sometimes what we need is more performance standards that allow us to evaluate what we want in a zone. So for instance, if you have an art, I'm just going to take your micro example. And say if you have an artist who's making one-off clothing pieces that really aren't different than a painting, or a sculpture, then that is one thing. If you have someone who's manufacturing clothing, but still on a modest scale, that's one thing. And then I'm not sure I'll go as far as sweatshops, but, a more robust, significant manufacturing process is another thing. And so, how do we capture the intensity and the size and the support functions, for instance, loading and services and, does it need to have blank walls all the way around, So those are some of the things that I think we're struggling with in trying to have a land use code that's more that gets us what we want, gives us the tools we need to create good edges, and yet be agile when someone comes in with something that meets the intent.
Thank you, Lucy. I think that is the million-dollar question, right? Is how do we have a vision of specificity that is clear and concise, but giving us the flexibility to do it and to get there? And that really, that really is the question.
Yeah, if I may, Chair, add to
Please.
that. So through this exercise, we're definitely going to be looking at these very specific and unique uses. And does it make a difference to call out a barber shop from a retail service to a bank? If they all sort of are a service type of a use, perhaps there's not any advantage to splitting the hair and calling them out separately. So in this exercise of collapsing those uses for retail services, and I think the memo talks about there are 250 specifically listed uses. Clearly, that doesn't serve any purpose of meeting the vision. But to answer Commissioner Milligan's question, if we have a square footage limitation, will that get us smaller stores or smaller businesses? There's a lot that goes into why some businesses are successful and others are not. Right. So the square footage limitation can do one thing for you. If you want smaller size and you want to keep out larger big box retail and you have a square footage limitation, it will keep those large boxes out because you have a maximum size that can go in. Will it get you the smaller businesses? It's a question mark. And the reason why people will locate that is because of economics. Smaller. I heard a lot of comments about the desire for the community to have these smaller places to gather, which is something that needs to occur. But a small food place cannot survive because the same small neighborhood that it's going to capture aren't going to come to that same place on a regular basis. But it might if they serve a certain thing. So really, the success of a small business is going to depend on a lot more reasons than just code. But if code is a barrier for locating those, then we can eliminate that barrier through the code update. So it I don't know if that answers your question, but okay.
Thank you, Minnie. Commissioner Zaragoza.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Zaragoza. I was thinking about temporary spaces, right? There was a pop-up shop in the Rogue Brewery. This was months and months ago, but it was a bunch of local artists came in there. That was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. We showed up, bought a few little things, felt very much like we were part of the neighborhood that day. In addition to that, during the pandemic, we had outdoor restaurants. All the streets were shut down. That was a lot of fun. And it made me think, why isn't this a normal thing? Obviously, it could become a normal thing, but that we don't have street vendors, right? Usually, active weekend places, you have your restaurants, you have your retail, but you also have street vendors, places where you go to get, a little treat, some food. And there isn't much of that around that I've seen. And I don't know if that's, something that is related to food trucks and things like that. But, do we have room for temporary spaces, pop-up shops, street vendors, things like that. I grew up in Los Angeles as a child. We never bought our tamales from anywhere but someone with a cooler on a corner somewhere, and they're always fantastic. So that's a nice thing. It comes with all of its complexities, but it's a nice thing, and it gets people out on the streets and talking with each other and enjoying each other's company. So that would be nice.
Get a Seattle hot dog in Issaquah. I love it. Commissioner Schulte.
Thank you, Chair Voice. Back to what Minnie was mentioning a little bit earlier, which was a great point. I think one of the things we have to be mindful of when we are looking at the various uses and spaces is really how they interact with each other, the symbiosis amongst the spaces, and can they survive depending on the uses that are adjacent to them. I've had the privilege to work with a lot of great developers, and I've gotten to hear things from their perspective in terms of why they don't build in areas, in certain areas. And a lot of it is due just to the challenge of, getting people to those areas, what is nearby, the tenants they're targeting, and sometimes those tenants themselves, retailers, companies, they have, non-compete disclosures where actually they don't want to be close to any competition themselves within a certain radius, a distance, mile or whatever it may be. So, it's great that we're starting the discussion of, what does the community want? What kind of uses? But then we also do have to think about, how do they play with each other? And the food trucks is a great example. A food truck you can't go wrong with, right? You bring in a food truck, it brings people, it gets people eating, excited, and all of a sudden they have the ability to start seeing the surrounding areas, the stores and the markets, whatever it may be, right? So things like that. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Morgan.
If you don't mind, I'll throw in a counterpoint, I guess, with regard to food trucks is if we do want ground floor retail in our buildings, with people going into them, one way to kill the restaurants in those buildings is bring in food trucks during prime time and take away the traffic that would actually go into those retail sites. So it's kind of, we might be able to get one or the other, but maybe not both. Thank you.
Fair point. Thank you.
Definitely appreciate the counterpoint because it's important. Anyone else like to speak? We'll give it a minute and let anybody finalize any thoughts. All right. Fantastic discussion. Hopefully staff has some wonderful notes to go back and work with as we continue to get deeper and deeper into this process. So now we'd like to open it up to public comment again, hopefully pertaining more to question 2, but again, as far as in general, all topics, but maybe an emphasis on number 2, if they so choose. So Kristen, do we have anyone signed up to speak?
Anyone I can sort of see now. Turns out it's a black hand being raised on a black background, so I can sort of see. I do see that Connie Marsh has her hand raised, and as does Susan Neville. If you all would like to speak, maybe turn your hand on and off, or if anyone else would like to speak, please raise your hand or put a note in the chat. If Connie Marsh would like to speak again. Connie, you are a panelist. Go ahead.
So things that are difficult or missing, special event permits aren't really in Title 18. And I think they would be more effective in Title 18. Right now, they go through the administration and then they sort of weirdly weave their way around public works engineering and sort of ricochet off of planning. And it makes it difficult for anyone to do a special event like, let's see, a whole circle of food trucks with dancing and music over in the Pickering parking lot in the evening to turn that desert of a parking lot into an active thing and send people into Michael's and let those people who hate food trucks go eat at Jenny Pho. And that would be a way to enliven some of our dead spots and be able to have neighborhood parties easily. If you guys want to bond and you want some action, it needs to be easily permittable instead of formidable. We have almost no direction for parks in our Title 18 code. We have exemptions where they don't have to follow the code. And we also have exemptions for our roads because they are considered to be outside of Title 18 because they are in the right of way. And this leads to a tremendous amount of confusion because it's sort of different rules for different people. And it perplexes the public, and it does not give our public works engineering, nor does it give our parks department sort of definitive guidelines for what they need to do. And it leaves the public out there with, I don't know, it's a road. What process does a road have? I don't know, it's a park. What process does a park have? So I think that these things need to be brought together so that the public knows a consistent pathway and all of the city has the same set of rules to follow. And this will help alleviate a lot of the confusion that we have had with the Central Issaquah plan out at Newport, where we have different sections of the city who have to be totally aligned to be successful, and they have not been in the past. Now, you all are thinking, well, that's not wandering around a neighborhood and that's not something that's missing. Well, welcome to my boring life. This is what I do. I read code and then I follow these things through in the evening. So this is part of my city. So it might seem oblique and really dull to you all, but I think it will have huge positive impact if we can do such things. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Saw a hand come down. If anyone would like to speak, raise your hand, please. Mary Lynch would like to speak. Mary, you are a panelist.
I found my hand. I just want to build on what Connie was saying, because in talking with parks on the use of the new park there on the south end of Front Street, kind of what I was saying, that would be a great place to have pop-ups, to work with the library, to have, readings, to have artists. But basically what Parks was saying, well, we don't know how we can use that park that way. We also have a park, we didn't get any buildings or local shops with the Newport Way build out, but we have a little piece of land that was dedicated to the park, which there's no funding for and no plan for. And right now, the developer has to keep it in grass and is being used as a dog park by those apartment people. That would be a great place to have pop-up art fairs, to have pop-up theater, music, that type of stuff. But how do you go about activating some of that? And that would, help us out here. So with what Connie was saying is we need to make sure that in the codes, we can do that on some of the parks and city land, as well as some of the private ones. And I really think, you know, a lot of our restaurants around here, they have their own food trucks. So they could, by bringing it out to some of these remote areas, they could advertise themselves by doing it. Plus, we could be then with the incubator. We've got areas that the city could help work with companies to incubate whatever they want, whether it be food or others, and let's use some of our houses that are city-owned properties to do that incubation and get going. And then hopefully they'll go and be part of the new community or work with Raleigh with his build out. Why can't he also, the city, work with Raleigh to have a building over there that's an incubation facility that's partnering with Raleigh and with the city to do those things that has been brought up already. That's my conclusion.
Great, thank you. Kristen, do we have any more public comments?
There are no other hands raised, but I'll ask one more time. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Please raise your hand. No, there's no one else who would like to speak.
Great, thank you. All right, moving on to the next item. Thank you all for the great discussion. Now I'd like to turn it over to Kristen to provide any city council updates. Please.
I do not have any city council updates. I will wait until the next topic. 2 topics to talk. I don't know if Minnie has any council updates. Minnie?
No, nothing to report. They're deep in the budget systems and discussions. So in terms of development, you know, we've looked at our fees, and we're just making a nominal increase to reflect the consumer price index. So there was a more robust analysis of the fees done in 2020. So this time it's a nominal fee increase as far as development fees go. So that's all, you know, that's on their agenda on November 1st, and then budget adoption on November 15th. But other than that, there isn't any discussion. There's potential under on November 1st, we'll discuss the ad hoc committees process under the good of the order. We had that discussion with the Title 18 ad hoc committee, what their role is and how, you know, they participate in this Title 18 update, but that's upcoming meeting. So that's all I have to say.
I was wrong. I do have one. The 2021 Comprehensive Plan and Zoning Map Amendments are going to council on November 9th for discussion and potentially on December 6th for action. So if you all are interested, you can tune into that.
Great, thank you, Minnie, and thank you, Kristen. And finally, Kristen, do you have any business or announcements? It has nothing to do with the city council.
I had 2 things that I wanted to let you know. One is just a note for PPC really quickly. DC might want to hear the rest, but PPC, I want you to take note that the next 3 meetings are not on our typical schedule. Because November 11th, the regular meeting is a holiday, November 25th is Thanksgiving, and December 25th is Christmas. So those 3 meetings would have been canceled. So we are having it next week, November 4th, and then November 8th, and then December 2nd. I mean, excuse me, November 4th, November 18th, and then December 2nd. So mark it on your calendars that those are not usual dates, please. The other thing that I wanted to let you know is that we applied for and received a grant today. The grant is for implementing some of our housing strategy work plan. One of those is potentially expanding inclusionary zoning outside of central Issaquah. Another is looking at missing middle, which would be things like condominiums, townhomes, cottage housing, micro units, and that kind of thing, and looking at where that's sort of a directive from the state to start including more of that. So it's to look and see where that might fit in our city. And the other one is to try and get more condominium development here, which also falls into missing middle. So we don't know yet exactly which path those are going to take, but they will be coming to you at some point in the relatively near future.
Well, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
that's kudos to Kristen for putting in a lot of work on the grant application and being successful with that. So we'll be going to council we went to council for approval to apply, and then in order to accept, it has to be accepted by city council. And the only thing I would add to this is the housing strategies program that the community and the council have adopted. So this will be implementing existing strategies that have gone through that public vetting out process, but now it's time to implement them.
That's
Great
great.
work. Yep.
All right, well, I'm gonna open it up one last time for any of our commissioners, staff, for the good of the order. Does anyone like to comment? Commissioner Milligan.
Slow on the keyboard. I'm sorry, I just wanted to revisit the questions 3 and 4, as I didn't quite get where we were going with those, when they were going to come back. And to say for our audience what it is you're talking about. Questions 3 and 4, people aren't always looking at the piece of paper. Can you?
Sure. I think we touched them in the beginning. I think we're figuring out a different process for it, to give it the attention it deserves. So we'll be back. We don't know at this point what that process looks like, but we'll be shaping it up to make it more robust than just fold it in currently the way it's set up. So we'll have more information for you.
And to be clear, so questions 3 and 4 had to do with something called House Bill 1220. And the state this past summer enacted a bill that requires all cities to allow for permanent affordable sort of housing, which we do, transitional housing, which we do. Those need to be a little clear in the code, but we do both of those, but also emergency housing and emergency shelters, which currently our code is silent on. So that's something that needs to be addressed. And as Minnie said, that will be a different path. Kind of maybe too big to be involved, to be part of this discussion.
I think that was a wise choice. So I want to, is there any further comment for the good of the order? Okay, well, I just want to say on my behalf, I want to thank all the people that made public comments. I want to thank my colleagues on the Planning Policy Commission. And I'd also like to thank our wonderful city staff, Lucy, Minnie, and Kristen. And finally, I want to say thank you to our Friends Development Commission. I know tonight is your guys' night off. So you guys coming into our house and providing just a great discussion. It's always enjoyable when we get to hang out with one another. And I know all of us really appreciate it. There being no further business, I adjourn this meeting of the Planning Policy Commission on the October 28th at 8:31. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason.